For our Old Testament reading, I'm going to read from Psalm chapter 145, verses 10 through 13. All your works shall give thanks to you, O God, and all your faithful shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to all people your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. The Lord is faithful in all his words and gracious in all his deeds. And now for the New Testament reading, it's taken from John chapter 18. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anybody to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated what kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked, "Are you king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is the truth?" But when he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover." They shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." The passage details the events leading to the trial of Jesus and the subsequent release of Barabbas.
Good morning, everyone. And who do we have? Kate? Oh, good morning to Kate. Let's bow for a word of prayer. God of truth, too often we bend truth to fit our agenda. Show us how to recognize and follow your truth, shown to us by the love and life of your Son, as we look deeper into this event, and let us be open to what the Spirit has for us now. The title of my message this morning is Living Through the Hard Places of Truth, or Could I Be Mistaken? This morning we're going to be looking into this story and a question that still resonates today. What is truth? But before we can wrestle with this question, we need to create the moment from the characters' perspective and their points of view. So who are the characters involved in this story? Well, this morning we have two Pontius Pilates and we have two Jesus. Now bear with me. I can tell by the look on your face, it'll all start to make sense here in a little bit. Our first Jesus has had a dramatic last 24 hours. The Last Supper in the upper room, where he gave them the cup and the wine. He acknowledged a traitor was among them. He washed his disciples' feet. He confronted Peter into another tense moment. And to know that someone is going to betray you has to hit your heart hard, if you've ever had that happen. Even so, he continues to pour out the truth of God to them. They leave and head towards Gethsemane, where Jesus prays, and if I could paraphrase, something like this: "This is a hard truth I do not want to go through, but life will unfold nevertheless." Suddenly he is arrested, and those who love him, or those who he loves, flee. He's taken in the night to appear before the high priest Caiaphas, who doesn't want anything to do with Jesus at all, because Jesus' way of life is not something Caiaphas wants to live. So they blindfold him and strike him, saying, "Prophesize," as they strike him again and again. "Who hit you?" I wonder what's going through his mind. At that point, he is held until morning in a holding cell, all night long, battered and bruised. Do you think he's thinking about revenge at this point? At morning, he's taken before the whole Sanhedrin. And of course, they lose it totally. They turn into a mob and off to Pontius Pilate, who determines, "I have found no fault in this man." And as soon as he realizes that Jesus belongs to Herod, and it's his jurisdiction, he sends him to Herod. Now, what else would you do with this innocent man? In his mind, he's totally innocent. So, Pontius Pilate is a controversial figure. There are two historical views that we're going to look at today. The Western Church we'll call view number one. They look at him with contempt as a ruthless bureaucrat thinking only of himself, only wanting to check a box, to move on down the road. I just want to get him out of my life. This is a characterization that we've heard time and time again. However, the Eastern Orthodox Church will call their view of Pilate number two, and his wife Claudia. They view them as saints who tried to do the right thing in a hard situation when there was no easy way out. In fact, on October 27th, the Eastern Orthodox celebrate both Pilate and his wife Claudia as saints each year. It's a big deal. So, we will continue to look back and forth at these views in a moment. But first, to draw a contrast, what I'd like to do is look at this story through a different lens. From here on forward, I will be role-playing as Pilate's interaction with Jesus from a more Eastern viewpoint instead of the Western viewpoint. And then at the end, we're going to compare the two of them. So let's continue. Pilate has sent Jesus back to Herod, who only wants to control Jesus. He wants him to do what he wants. You know, miracles, throw me all the good stuff of life, and thank you very much, please. But I don't think God was up for that. So Herod didn't get what he wanted, and so they physically abuse him and beat him again. I'll have to think about that, not getting what you want from God and abusing him. That's an interesting thought. Herod then sends Jesus back to Pilate. Now this is for a second time after he already declared Jesus innocent the first time. Now, by now I'd be getting frustrated with this whole affair if I was Pilate. After a brief, intense encounter between him and the religious leaders, Peter leaves the leaders, goes back to the praetorium, and calls Christ to him. Remember what physical and emotional state Jesus is in and what his last 24 hours have been like. That's important to realize why his responses in this are so incredible. John 18, we'll pick up. Pilate is in the praetorium, and he says to Jesus, "Are you king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, as it was read, "Are you speaking of yourself, or did others tell you concerning me?" His question is one of clarification. Do you want to know for yourself or for others? He stands beaten and bruised and still reaches out to the enemy. I find this simply incredible. Pilate answers, "Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" He can find nothing wrong with him. I find Jesus' answer fascinating to me because he puts the kingdom first, not his title or his position. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so they should deliver me from the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. That response to me is a very humble way of saying, I am a king, but my kingdom comes first, because it's not in this realm. Pilate, I think, is starting to understand. Are you then a king? Jesus answered, you said rightly. This is the cause I was born. This is the cause I came into the world, to bear witness. And everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And now the question, what is truth? We need to stop and unpack this a little bit. First, my kingdom is not from here, and that we should bear witness of the truth. Everyone who hears the truth hears my voice. Ultimate truth is standing before him. He embodies the kingdom's values in this foreign world. God's kingdom is not of this world. God's kingdom is rooted in spiritual authority from beyond our world. Therefore, he tells Pilate, I don't need to be defended. This is not my world. His kingdom is rooted within us, not like worldly kingdoms that try to seek to rule over us. That's not his way. We live on this outpost called earth, but this is not our kingdom. It's in another world. I also find it fascinating here. He talks about the kingdom and not himself, but the kingdom. His answer is humble and non-threatening. I have often thought about the tension between these two statements. Make disciples of all nations, and somehow the church has this apparent self-imposed mandate to defend God's kingdom at every turn. And Jesus never did that. I wonder how we would fulfill both of these statements in love. I say in love because if you don't speak truth in love, that's what we're supposed to do according to Scripture, right? If you don't speak truth in love, I have to ask a question. Is it still truth if we don't speak it in love? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I thought of a good example, though, of speaking the truth in love. I'll have to share a story. It was about my wife, Deb, and I. Shortly after we were married, it hadn't been too long, maybe 6 months or so, I had put on a couple extra pounds. Because, it's her cooking. You've ate her cooking. You know what I mean. It's good cooking, right? And so I'm checking myself out in the mirror, and I'm looking at myself going, I don't look too bad. I've kind of put on a little bit of weight here, but I'm not looking too bad. And Deb, of course, well, she says this to me. She says, well, honey, I think you're at maximum poochiness, I think is the way she said it. Now, to me, that was one of the best examples of speaking truth in love that I'm aware of. Even though it was a hard truth. Of course, I made sure I got rid of my maximum poochiness, but, that's my own issue. What is truth? Now, no one really knows what was on Pilate's mind. But I'm going to speculate based on a final piece of this story that's yet to be revealed. Twice now he has declared Jesus innocent and a victim, a scapegoat for the threatening religious leaders. I believe Pilate's question was rhetorical. What is truth? He knows Jesus is innocent, but those religious leaders, they have a much, much, much different truth that they believe. This is the beginning of a rock and a hard place for Pilate. He heads back out to the Jews again and says now for the third time, I find no fault in this person at all. This is the third time. Now I'm going to jump to Matthew 27 to fill in some of the story that John does not include. After this, he returns again to Jesus. and tells Jesus, "Do you hear how many things they are testifying against you?" But Jesus answers him not one word. So Pilate marveled greatly, the scripture tells us. 3 times so far he has been acquitted. Jesus is beaten and bruised man. And Pilate marvels, simply marvels at him. Tell me, when was the last time you marveled at something? I mean, really marveled at it. This is where Pilate is. He's standing before this man and he's simply marveling. Now, he remembers there's still a way to save this innocent man. It was the feast of the governors. Now, at that time, they already had a rebel prisoner, Barabbas. We all remember him. He's already been found guilty of rebellion and treason. Therefore, he thinks to himself, this is a good match. I'll put Barabbas, the guilty one, against Jesus, the innocent one, who I can't find any fault in, and they can't find any fault in him either. Whom do you want me to release? Jesus or Barabbas? For he knew that they handed him over because of envy. He knows there's no fault in him. But before a choice is made, I need to bring in Jesus number 2. There is an interesting point of view when you look at the name of Jesus and Barabbas. You see, Jesus wasn't the first to have that name. How many of you went through school and had multiple people in your classroom with the same name? Okay, all right, I did too. And I remember from 1st grade to 7th grade, there were 3 students in the classroom. There was a Richard Orlando, Richard Snyder, and a Richard Rice. Well, the teacher was not going to have any of that. So they said, you need to pick the name that you want to be called, because we all had the same name. And you know, Richard is kind of an interesting name because you can do Rich, Richie, Rick, Ricky, Dick, Dickie. You know, one of them ended up Rick, one of us ended up Ricky, and one of us ended up Dickie. Now, I'm not going to tell you who I was, but I will tell you this. It wasn't until I was 21 and I left New York State before I could finally get anyone to call me Richard. And every time I met someone, they'd say, "Oh, Richard, what would you like to be called?" And I'd say, "Richard." Now, of course, that all went out the window as soon as I moved back home because they remembered the other nickname, but, you know, that goes how it goes. Now, archaeologists have unearthed over 70 tombs from that period of Jesus' death with the same first name. People knew there was a deliverer coming, so many of them named their sons Jesus. Now, the first Jesus was also known as Jesus Bar Joseph, son of Joseph. And the second Jesus was known as Jesus Barabbas, a son of Barabbas. So you have 2 Jesuses that we're looking at here. Though their names were the same, their first names, their points of view and perspective on how to accomplish their goals were polar opposite. Jesus' nonviolent way in the face of his last 24 hours is kingdom living at its hardest. He's not fighting back. To choose to follow in response like Jesus Bar Joseph is to choose to live a life in peace within and to face those who oppose us with love, dignity, and respect. That's the way that Christ handles things. This whole idea of feeling opposition from others and choosing a non-resistant response runs contrary to our ego's reaction when we are offended or harmed. Because when we're offended or harmed, our first reaction is usually to lash out. It comes from deep within. Jesus' instruction and example is to turn the other cheek. Always runs in opposition to our ego. That sounds great, but that's not really what I want to do. So it runs in opposition to our ego, which seeks to defend those who hold a truth different from ours. The heartbreaking result of this, if you allow our egos to take over, is we just enable a cycle of attack and defense over and over and over again to thrive in our world. However, Jesus models the Spirit's response not to defend our egos, even in the opposition runs contrary to the truth. That's a hard place to be. I fear Far too many today secretly prefer a Jesus Barabbas. He's a fighter. He doesn't mind mixing it up. He's already a hero to the people because he led a revolt. He's a brawler. He's a man of action. The problem was the truth. The people believed they needed was not what they actually needed. They thought they needed freedom from Rome oppression. What they needed was freedom from the bondage of their religious truth and freedom to live away in the truth and the life of God as He desires us through Jesus Christ. It wasn't that kind of bondage. They needed personal freedom of bondage. Let's finish this story because choices have to be made, even if it's a hard one. While Pilate is sitting on the judgment seat, he's already asked the mob to choose which one. He receives a message from his wife. Message says, "Have nothing to do with this just man, for I have suffered many things in a dream because of him." Now, we don't look at dreams the way they did back in the Old and New Testament. Back in the Old and New Testament, dreams were very significant. They were extremely important. People believed they were conduits, realms where God spoke. They did not take them lightly. So think of Pilate now. He's already determined in his heart that Jesus is innocent multiple times. And there, in the midst of them choosing between both Jesuses, he gets a message, he believes, from God. It's not hard to believe, though. Again, he asks him, "Which two do you want to release?" And they say, "Barabbas." "What shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" Because Pilate does not want to kill Jesus from this viewpoint. He's trying to save him any way, shape, or form he can. Let him be crucified. And once again, why? Why? What evil has he done? And they cry out even more, "Let him be crucified. Let him be crucified." And Pilate saw he could not prevail against the crowd because a revolt was getting ready to start. He washed his hands of the whole thing and said, "I am innocent of the blood of this just man. You see to it." This is a rock in a hard place. Do you see the sheer irony of this entire event? The Jews wanted to execute one of their own who had healed them, fed them, taught them the ways of God. And the Roman Pontius Pilate, while the oppressor, is the only one who has shown mercy to this person 3 times, finding no fault or guilt at all. Next week, you're going to continue this story. I won't be here, and good luck whoever does. He attempts to seek mercy from the crowd of an innocent man. He wants to save, hearing what he believes was a message from God. He doesn't want to crucify this person, and he doesn't want to find fault in him. He knows he's innocent. What is the takeaway from this event? Well, first, let's look at the character's truth of each of them. You have Pontius Pilate, number 1. From a Western perspective, suggests that the world has those people who do not care for anything but themselves, or any truth that does not support their personal control over themselves or others is discarded as weak. And if that was the true Pontius Pilate, then Jesus Bar Joseph's nonviolent response was classic kingdom living, disarming and gracious to the very end. And if Pontius Pilate, number 2, from an Eastern viewpoint, suggests that mercy and grace can come from the most unexpected places, even our enemies. But also, there is this hard truth that there may be times when all of our best efforts to do right and to prevent harm can be upended by forces we cannot control. Now, obviously, Jesus was bound for the cross so that we could be bound for heaven. But this view of Pilate in this event seems to mirror the reality that I believe sometimes we struggle with. We do get prayers answered. But it's the unanswered ones that are the hardest truths to live through. Those realities that don't seem to work together to the good for those who love God. Next, we have Jesus Barabbas. For me, he represents our egos on the loose. Choosing this way leads to a never-ending cycle of attack and defense. It's not the way of love. Can you imagine the conversation would have been like between Pilate and Jesus Barabbas? It would have been intense. And finally, we have Jesus Bar Joseph. After the last 24 hours, beaten and battered, he refuses to defend himself or his kingdom. We so often forget this is not our home. Another waits beyond. We are sojourners in a land we tent upon. Like an outpost in a foreign land, our home is in another realm. It reminds me of that verse in John 1:14, where the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word dwelt literally in the Greek means tented. I'm not making a permanent home here. I'm coming here for a short time. That's what he's telling us. And maybe that's a perspective we may need to look at a little more. To strive to live in peace without getting ramped up with every news story is hard. It really is. To keep our egos in check, especially when there are so many that do not, it's a hard place to live. I'm going to close with a few lines of a poem by Emily Dickinson entitled, "This World is Not Conclusion." This world is not conclusion. A sequel stands beyond. Invisible as music, but positive as sound. It beckons and it baffles. So let it be.